From the outside, the flat looked like any other masonette. It was the second of 8 doors on a long landing that permanently smelled like a public toilet. The low lights that sometimes flickered above the doors were dimmed further by the bodies of flies that lay in the glass enclosures that covered the bulbs. Number 98 was a 3-bedroom flat in an estate that used to house low-income families. Violence and abuse were normal within the walls of these dwellings, and the whole area was, like in the animal world, survival of the fittest. The weak, sensitive or vulnerable were routinely smashed and trampled on, their possessions taken as they were hounded until the government rehoused them. Some committed suicide. In number 98, this was rumoured to be the case. Years passed and the local council decided to clean up the estate, placing a demolition order on the whole area to make way for what they called modern housing. All the residents were rehomed in other slum areas around the city, and the estate became a ghost town for several years. During this time, number 98 developed a bit of a reputation for being haunted. Some claimed that an entity resided there, and as such no one dared to enter the property, and it stayed that way until one night late in October. The night before this, 2 tradesmen, Dean and Lee, were talking with friends in the Bathfield public house over a pint of Guinness. As the beer flowed and the night went on, the conversation turned to the paranormal, and in particular, number 98. The fire flickered and crackled in the dimly lit room as the men sat around the oak table. "I heard that there's a shadow-like demon in there," someone offered, as the warm glow of the fire cast shadows on their faces. "Me too," said Dean. "It's the guy that hung himself coming back to get revenge on his tormentors." He slowly took a drink which left a white moustache of froth along his top lip that he casually wiped away before looking back at the men. "If that's the case," answered Lee, "everyone apart from his bullies should be safe to go in there." "No way you'd ever get me in there," one of the men shouted. "I'd go," said Dean. "Me too," was Lee's reply. He looked at Dean as if offering a challenge, eyes wide and one eyebrow raised. Dean offered his hand and the two shook on it. The pair decided that the very next night would be as good as any, and the plans were laid. They would both carry sleeping bags and food in a rucksack, somehow get into the property, then spend a whole night in there. Darkness descended the next night and a full moon cast shadows as trees danced in the soft autumn breeze. Lee had picked Dean up from his house in an old blue Ford, and after throwing their supplies in the back seat, they set off to the masonette. Everything seemed so peaceful as they neared the place, and the streets were empty apart from discarded cigarette packets and the odd empty beer bottle. After reaching the block, they quietly tiptoed along the landing towards number 98. The blue door to the empty flat was covered in old graffiti, and 1 or 2 of the terracotta tiles were missing from the wall beside it. To the left was a bathroom window, which was a long horizontal frame just within arm's reach above them. "Shall we kick the door in or try to get through the window?" asked Dean. "I reckon the window," answered Lee. "If we kick the door in, it'll be left swinging and anyone could come in while we're asleep." "Good call," said Dean, and he climbed up onto the railings and started to kick at the window. It didn't take much to knock the glass through, and they both squeezed in through the narrow opening. They landed in the bath, and with the broken glass crunching under their feet, opened the door to find themselves standing in a corridor. As moonlight glanced through the window, they could see the gold pattern carpet look like something from the 70s. The flat's layout meant that they had entered upstairs, so dodging the peeling wallpaper that hung off the walls, they explored the bedrooms. The first was a double bedroom with a built-in wardrobe and not much else. They carried on to what was obviously a box room that had a boarded-up window, before coming to what looked like a child's room with a small bed still in and partly removed Superman wallpaper. The first sign they got that something wasn't quite right was a bang that came from the double bedroom. A reasonably quiet bang, but enough to catch their attention. It looked like one of the wardrobe doors had slammed shut, and although both a little spooked, they made sure no one was there and went downstairs to look around. The kitchen had a few pots and pans laying around, nothing of interest. So they walked through to the living room, passing a small bathroom to the left, which had what looked like 15 or so stab marks in the door. "Christ, I wonder what happened there," whispered Dean, carefully touching the thin knife marks. "Let's not think about it and just get through tonight," Lee answered as he pulled his friend away. The living room was empty, but for a wide stone-built low shelf with a millstone built into it, so they unpacked their sleeping bags and took off their boots. Lee was pouring them both a coffee from his flask when very suddenly a loud banging came from upstairs. Fear gripped both of them, but before going to investigate, Dean instinctively shouted, "Shut it!" The banging stopped, which made the both of them even more scared, as now they knew that whatever was banging had heard them. In stunned silence, they looked at each other before a quiet creak was heard at the top of the stairs beyond the closed living room door. Ever so quietly, the shuffling footsteps of something could be heard slowly sneaking down the stairs towards them. Hearts pounding, they both subconsciously counted each one of the steps as they creaked before whatever it was stopped at the bottom, right outside the door. They both held their breath for what seemed like an eternity, and as the bright moonlight lit up the room and its shadows, they saw the door handle turn. Lee's coffee fell to the floor as the door opened and a huge black shadowy creature bent down to climb under the doorframe into the room. Its matted fur touched the ceiling as it stood upright and shuffled towards the two terrified men in silence. The estate was empty. No one heard their screams. 2 days later, after they'd battered the door down, the police found Lee and Dean in the living room of number 98. Lee's wife had called them when he failed to return home the next day. They were found huddled together on top of their sleeping bags, with no apparent injuries, both faces eternally locked in a look of horror. Months passed again and eventually the flats were demolished. But to this day, no one has really explained exactly what was the thing at number 98.